Alright, we're just gonna start. You read the title, you know why you're here. So, number one, the cosmological argument, right? So, it usually goes something like this: everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause, and that cause is God. It sounds intuitive at first glance, but it's kind of ass for multiple reasons, right? So the first one is that it's fallacious. The argument assumes that because things within the universe have causes, the universe itself must have a cause. That's just a composition fallacy. Just because every brick in a wall is small does not mean the wall itself is small. Properties of parts do not automatically transfer to the wholes. Causality may be a local feature inside space-time rather than a metaphysical rule governing existence, right? And that distinction matters egregiously because causality as understood in physics is deeply tied to space-time geometry, right? So without time, the concept of before and after becomes incoherent. So asking what caused the universe before time existed is like, it's like saying what's north of the North Pole. Doesn't make any fucking sense, right? It's also stupid because of quantum indeterminacy, right? So classic metaphysics assumes a strict determinism worldview. Every event must have a sufficient cause, right? But quantum physics destabilizes that assumption. For certain quantum events that appear certain quantum events may appear fundamental. Yo, yeah, I'm smoking right now, so like my brain is like on autopilot. My bad. Certain quantum events appear fundamentally probabilistic. Whew, I could barely get that sentence out, bro. Oh man. So, for example, radioactive decay, vacuum fluctuations, or particle interactions. Right. These processes are modeled through probabilistic wave functions. Right. The exact moment of decay for a radioactive atom cannot currently be determined from prior deterministic states. The system evolves according to the Schrodinger equation. Can I get like the Schrodinger equation up on screen for the dorks? Hold on. Yeah, this. But measurement outcomes emerge probabilistically via the Born rule, right? Meaning reality at quantum scales may not operate through strict classical causation at all. This weak this weakens the premise of the cosmological argument. So, but even beyond there are still like it's also special pleading because they're eventually going to be like everything needs a cause except for God. And that just introduces an exemption without justification. If something can exist necessarily without a cause, then I can just say the universe itself or quantum reality itself could potentially be the necessary existence that doesn't need justification. I could just say that's what that is. The argument doesn't demonstrate why God uniquely qualifies as the uncaused entity. It merely just asserts that being the case, which is why it's special pleading. Okay, so let me take this down. So the next argument for God that we're going to be shitting on is the argument for motion, right? So Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas famously dubbed this argument. So the simplified version is that things move, right? Whatever moves must be moved by something else. An infinite regress of the things that are moving is impossible. Therefore, there must be an unmoved mover, which is God. And the argument depends heavily on Aristotelian metaphysics, right? Actuality, potentiality, and teleology. But modern physics like no longer operates under Aristotelian mechanics. Under Aristotle, motion required a continual mover, but inertia literally just disproves that. Isaac Newton demonstrated that objects in motion remain in motion unless acted upon, right? So force equals mass times acceleration. But motion itself isn't evidence of a substantiating metaphysical mover. Objects continue moving naturally within space-time. The arguments from motion emerged from outdated pre-Newtonian intuitions about mechanics. It's dumb. Quantum field, the quantum fields just further like make it look dumb. In quantum field theory, right, we have particles that are excitations of the underlying field. Reality itself on this level isn't composed of like tiny billiard balls that require external pushing. The vacuum itself possesses fluctuating energy states. Let me see if I can get like an equation for this up on screen. Can we get the equation? Can we get an equation? Okay. Dude, just let me look at it. Okay. There we go, chat. Okay, the unmoved mover. Okay. So like I said, virtual particles emerge from quantum fluctuations governed by uncertainty relations. The unmoved mover framework assumes that classical deterministic ontology that modern quantum ontology just does not preserve. It it doesn't. So the next shitty argument for God is the fine-tuning argument, right? So the claim is that physical constants appear finely tuned for life. Right, it's so ass. It's like if gravity were slightly different, we wouldn't be here. If electromagnetism shifted, we wouldn't be here. If the cosmological constant changed, life may not exist. Like it, like they're saying this like it's groundbreaking, being like oh, if the universe were different, it would be fucking different. No fucking shit, nigga. What? But they conclude with those things that life may not exist. Therefore, the universe was designed intentionally, right? So, the first problem that I have with it is anthropic selection bias, right? So, we observe a universe that's compatible with life because observers can only emerge in universes compatible with observers. And that's what's known as the anthropic principle, right? Imagine that a puddle-shaped water becoming conscious and saying, wow, the hole fits me perfectly. It must have been designed for me. But the puddle adapted to the hole, not vice versa. Similarly, right, life adapted to the universe. The universe wasn't necessarily optimized for life. That just sounds dumb. The next problem is that the universe is mostly hostile to life. If the universe was designed for life, it's bizarrely inefficient. Nearly all of reality is lethally hostile to humans, right? For us, for example, the vacuum of space, radiation, black holes, supernovas, frozen voids. Even Earth itself is mostly uninhabitable for humans. A universe optimized for life would not require organisms to survive on a microscopic layer of one planet orbiting one star among trillions. That doesn't make any sense. The next problem that I see like instantly is that there are like models for multiverses. Inflationary cosmology and certain interpretations of string theory allow for potentially vast numbers of universes with varying constants. If enough universes exist, some will naturally permit life. I mean, that's like a guarantee. If it's an infinite amount of universes, of course some of them are gonna have life, right? No divine calibration required. And importantly, right, theism doesn't actually solve the fine-tuning problem, because then you have to explain the complexity and fine-tuning of God's mind. An infinitely intelligent consciousness is arguably far more complex than physical law itself. Like what? How exactly did God create the universe? But okay, moving on to the next dookie butt argument for God. It's known as the ontological argument, right? So it goes like this: God is the greatest conceivable being. Existing in reality is greater than existing only in the imagination. Therefore, God must exist. This argument was proposed by Anselm of. Let me look it up. It was proposed by Anselm of Canterbury. Yep. So let me explain why this is dumb. A lot of philosophers reject it because existence is not a normal property, right? So I'll give you like what Immanuel Kant would say. He would argue that like existence isn't a predicate. So saying an existing dollar does not add a property beyond the concept of a dollar. Existence isn't like red, tall, intelligent, powerful. It's not like one of those, right? It simply means that the concept is instantiated in reality. But you cannot define things into existence. Otherwise, someone could define the greatest conceivable island into reality too. The structure just becomes logically absurd. So, moving on. Quantum physics kind of like also gets rid of God more so than you would think. One of the most pseudo-scientific claims out there that for some reason is extremely persistent is that quantum mechanics proves consciousness creates reality. And that's kind of based on misunderstandings of the observer effect, right? But in physics, an observer does not mean a conscious mind. What it means is an interaction with another physical system, right? A detector counts as an observer. A photon counts. An atom counts. Wave function collapse, depending on interpretation, does not require human awareness. There's no experimentally verified evidence that consciousness generates a physical reality. That's just made up. But more so, classical theism relies heavily on deterministic causality, metaphysical necessity, stable essence, teleology, and quantum mechanics literally just introduces, right, indeterminacy, probabilistic ontology, wave function superpositioning, non-locality, vacuum instability. Reality, it appears less like a carefully engineered machine and more like a probabilistic mathematical structure governed by statistical distributions. Theists often argue that something can't come from nothing, but quantum vacuum states aren't nothing. They are the lowest energy states of quantum fields. Even empty space contains a fluctuating energy density, right? Virtual particle pairs continuously emerge and annihilate themselves throughout the vacuum of space. The vacuum itself possesses structure. So cosmological models involving spontaneous universe generation are not equivalent to magic from absolute nothingness. That doesn't make any sense. So another thing that I've started seeing for some reason is that people think that like math helps prove God, but no, mathematics does not require God. They may think it does because it's abstract, universal, and immaterial, but mathematics doesn't inherently imply a divine mind. Math may just simply describe structural relationships inherent to logical systems, right? And I'll give you an example for that, right? So prime numbers are not created, right? They're consequences of a numerical axiom. Once the axiomatic framework exists, the certain truth would follow necessarily. Right? That's how a logical system works. So, but many apologists will misuse Kurt Gödel, right? He actually demonstrated the limitations in formal systems, right? Very roughly, that any sufficiently powerful mathematical system contains truths that cannot be proven within the system itself, right? If F is constant, then F is incomplete. That doesn't prove God. If anything, all it does is just undermine the idea that reality operates as a perfectly complete deductive structure, comprehensible throughout absolute metaphysical certainty, right? Saying a lot of, to the average person, I feel like I'm just saying a lot of bullshit. Like, I feel like niggas that's not up on it, they just like, yo, fuck, what are you talking about? My bad, bro. But the show must go on, bro. We're almost done. I just got like 2 more parts to this. So, furthermore, apologists will sometimes claim that actual infinities are impossible without a transcendent being, for example, right? But mathematics handles infinities rigorously through set theory, right? George Cantor demonstrated different cardinalities of infinity. Infinite structures emerge naturally in mathematics without invoking any supernatural entity. So you don't need any type of God for infinity. But the bigger philosophical issue that people don't see is that God explains a lot less about reality in the universe than people think he does. At the deepest level, many philosophers will argue that God is not actually an explanation. It just functions as an explanatory terminus, a stopping point. Let me give you an example. Why does the universe exist? God. Why does God exist? He just necessarily exists. But the necessity is just asserted. You haven't actually demonstrated why God is necessary. And the theistic arguments merely just relocate mystery rather than actually solving the problem, right? And eternal consciousness, intelligence with intentions, awareness, rationality, and creative power is arguably more ontologically complex than the universe itself. So if you're invoking God may increase, that literally increases... It increases the explanatory burden rather than trying to reduce it. But yeah, these are like a bunch of reasons as to why people believe in God, some of which I used to believe, but as I've explained, they're all dumb. So yeah, that's about it. See you later. Peace.